All right, great. Well, thanks for being here today, Tom, on the Insight Roundtable. As folks know, the series is really focused on providing practical, real world advice for lawyers in their first 10 years or so of practice. And we focus on interviewing leading in house counsel and folks in the business space. And we are very lucky to have with us here today Tom Moriarty, who has served for many years as the General Counsel and Chief Policy and External Affairs Officer at CVS Health, which is a Fortune 5 company that folks probably know best from its over 9,000 retail locations, but that does far more than that, with over 300,000 employees that addresses the healthcare needs of one in basically every three Americans, which is a pretty remarkable statistic. Tom joined the company in 2012 and has been involved in many critical developments, which maybe we'll touch on today, including the company's 2014 decision to stop selling tobacco products and the company's 2018 acquisition of Aetna, the country's third largest health insurer. And he has managed a team of over 250 lawyers for many years. And he recently announced his plans to retire. So we'll look at this as something of an exit interview. Thanks for being with us today here, Tom.
Happy to do it, Steve. Looking forward to the conversation.
So maybe it'd be helpful just to kind of start and give an idea of what attracted you to the healthcare space originally. I mean, you've spent a long career in the healthcare space in various jobs. Maybe you could talk about what attracted you to it, and then maybe a bit about the path that brought you eventually to CVS.
Yeah, so like most career paths, there's not a direct line generally. You sort of you do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you start to figure things out early on in your career. I started out right out of school at a big Wall Street law firm, and I was hired to do white collar criminal defense work, and actually was going to work for now Judge Rakoff in his role defending a number of the folks on Wall Street who are being tried for white collar criminal related activities. But as happenstance, occurs, the firm got in a huge piece of commercial litigation that sucked in about 25, 30 associates, and all plans were off, and we were all kind of thrown into that litigation. So after about a year of doing that, I decided to leave and went out to a small firm in New Jersey, mainly to get into the courtroom because I wanted to be a trial lawyer, and get my feet wet and get the experience. It's almost the fork in the road after a little bit of time. If you want to be a trial lawyer, is you generally will go to a U.S. attorney's office or a prosecutor's office for a few years, get that trial experience, and then come back to a firm, or go in house. And that sort of was my thinking. But that firm was representing the New York Blood Center at the time, and this was at the height of the transfusion AIDS cases. And the role of the blood centers in, what role did they have? And in fact, furthering HIV infections through the blood supply. So I just learned so much about the healthcare system and all the issues associated with healthcare, be it privacy, medical records, how the systems work, how hospitals work with doctors worked with others. And it just fascinated me. And then I was lucky enough, I answered an ad in the New York Times for a job at Merck, the pharmaceutical company. I was one of 600 resumes, and somehow my resume got picked out. I joined Merck, and it kind of went from there.
Wow. And so what year was that you ended up starting at Merck?
That would have been in 1993. Yeah.
And so you went to Merck, and you really never looked back in terms of staying in-house in terms of a legal role. And how did your role there evolve at Merck, and then how did it lead to kind of where you eventually got to?
Yeah, so I mean, when I joined, I actually joined the team that was representing the animal health group, which was a global business, and it was a great experience because it was roughly about $1 billion business, but it gave me a chance to do work both domestically as well as internationally. I spent a lot of time in Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa working on issues down there. And really just learned so much about pharmaceutical development, the role of pharmaceuticals in healthcare, and then again, that interaction of pharmaceuticals with the broader healthcare system. And so I went from being a trial lawyer to essentially a self-trained deal lawyer and corporate lawyer within a few years. And I was lucky enough to have both legal as well as business roles over the years at Merck and then Medco and then at CVS.
And have you had any, if your preference over the years at all between business and legal versus policy, wearing all those hats? What's kind of brought you the most satisfaction?
Well, honestly, the last several years, helping the country navigate and address the COVID pandemic really brought all those skill sets together. And serving kind of as the lead person for CVS Health with the White House Task Force on the COVID response, that probably was the most satisfying, time in my career, because it brought everything together and really allowed us to excel as a company in leading the response for the country.
Any specific story that sticks out from that time period?
Well, there are a lot. I do, put politics aside. I think the smartest decision that was made early on was the formation of Operation Warp Speed and bringing in General Perna and General Ostrowski and the folks from the Department of Defense who did global logistics for the Army and the Department of Defense, bringing that expertise in to help navigate putting a national testing program in place and then a national vaccine distribution system in place. Whoever had that idea deserves an awful lot of credit, because that accelerated so greatly the country's ability to respond to the pandemic.
I'm curious, looking back over the years from being in various legal departments and watching the whole field evolve, what are, if any, kind of the biggest ways that you've seen how large companies interact with their outside counsel change over the years? Because I imagine you've seen some pretty big shifts.
Yeah, so it's evolved from the in-house lawyer kind of being almost a pass-through to the outside law firm, where an issue is identified, we need the expertise. All right, let's find the firm, and the in-house lawyer essentially is managing the relationship and managing the issue. What you've seen a lot of companies do, Merck, we did it at Merck, I did it obviously at Medco, and then clearly at CVS. We have built up multi-practice groups in-house now, where we have an awful lot of expertise sitting resident within the four walls of the company. So I think last time I checked, we had some 36 or 37 separate practice groups amongst the 250 or so lawyers in the company that covered pretty much every issue that we had to deal with. So we have the expertise in-house, so we leverage now both the expertise as well as the resources of the outside firms. And so it has shifted from kind of just managing the issues to owning the issues and being the quarterback of the issues and making sure you have the right expertise and then resources to address it. And I think that's been the single biggest change, that if you're an in-house lawyer and you don't know the company as well as the business people, and you don't know the issue as well as your outside lawyer, then you're probably not going to be the best in-house lawyer for too long.
That's a great point. I mean, and you bring up an interesting thing that certainly outside folks and folks in their first 10 years absolutely have noticed, which is different companies really do have different approaches to this type of issue. So you have some companies that, they'll have a pretty lean in-house team, and they will then rely pretty extensively on outside counsel, almost as kind of an arm, the legal arm of the company, to address a lot of things. And then on the other hand, you've got companies maybe on the further end of the other spectrum where they want to build out a really significant in-house team, where the idea is, let's try to do everything we possibly can in-house without needing to use our outside lawyers. I'm just curious where kind of you find yourself falling on that spectrum, and what you kind of see as the advantages or disadvantages of those approaches that you've watched over time.
It's a great question. I mean, on one level, it's a little bit of a math exercise. So I'll give you one example. We were spending an awful lot of money on environmental issues with outside counsel. And as we started to look at it, there's an efficiency that can be gained by bringing, if the expense is of a certain number, there's an efficiency that can be gained by bringing that expertise in-house and then leveraging the outside firm, when needed to deal with issues. But there's a lot of day-to-day kind of things that bringing it in-house, you're more efficient, and then you're building a knowledge base internally that's better. And you're right, it goes across the board, across the gamut, depending on company size, kind of company expense focus, and really area and industries. And I think, going back to your prior question, I do think one of the other really big changes over the last, say, 20 plus years that I have seen is 20 years ago, a lot of the relationships with the law firms were at the board level. And that's how the firms maintain the relationships with the company. That is clearly now devolved to the role solely of the general counsel, and the general counsel making that decision as to which firm, why, and who are we going to use.
How did that evolution happen?
It was
It was definitely noticeable for sure.
Yeah, it was over time, and I think it had to do an awful lot with the level of expertise and managerial expertise of the general counsels of lawyers who started to go in-house to become
Right.
general counsels. Where, early on when I first started, they, how they became general counsel was unclear. And over time, it was very clear how they became general counsel. They were either very good deal lawyers or very good litigators, and ultimately very good managers. And so it almost became much more of a management focus as opposed to just, who's the best lawyer.
Yep. Now, speaking of the idea of managing people, I mean, you obviously have a very large in-house team at CVS and people that you've been responsible for. I mean, what's been your approach to managing what I imagine is a diverse, geographically dispersed team? How have you tried to bring folks to the point that they feel like they're working together? I mean, this is something we face as outside counsel, and especially lawyers in their first 10 years of practice have been struggling with in this kind of post-COVID world where so many more people are working from home than ever before. How to kind of make people feel like they're working together for a common cause, like they're a part of something beyond we're kind of all logging on to the same things. How have you dealt with those issues?
Yeah, and I guess I was lucky early on. I had the experience of managing what can only be called an extended workforce. So I had lawyers in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa that I might physically see once a year. And it was long before video. So a lot of it was phone. And then, obviously over email and document exchanges that way. So I got fairly comfortable managing in an extended work environment. And then at CVS, we have centers of excellence across the country. So we have a large one in Rhode Island. We have a large one in Chicago, large one just outside of Phoenix and Scottsdale, a large one in Dallas. And so it's just allowed for a natural way of folks to engage without being physically present in the same office all the time. It takes a special lawyer, to be able to manage that way and live that way. But by having the centers of excellence, at least they have some base of engagement with other lawyers, but then they're practicing across the country with lawyers who are distributed throughout the country. And, COVID clearly accelerated that. And I think in a good way. I think we became, as a team, much more efficient and able to address issues. And it allowed for a work-life balance that was getting harder and harder to address as a manager as we kept getting busier and busier as the business grew.
What are those centers for excellence? Can you describe a bit about what they are?
I'm sorry, Steve.
Can you describe a bit about what those centers for excellence are that you have
Sure.
set up?
Yeah, I mean, they're largely built around the business units and where the business units have their primary business centers. So Rhode Island is the home of the company. It's the corporate headquarters. So that is largely the retail pharmacy legal team and the corporate team. The Scottsdale office out in Arizona, that is where our pharmacy benefit management business is largely based. And so you'll see a lot of the lawyers supporting that business at the Scottsdale facility. Similarly, in Hartford now, we have the bolus of lawyers who had supported and still support the Aetna health plan business. So they're largely built around that. But again, the corporate law center is largely based in Rhode Island because that's where the home office is.
So how do you think about advising outside counsel, and especially, with our audience of folks focusing on their first 10 years of practice, all the way from associates to, I guess, the most junior partners, how they can, build relationships with the folks at companies when so much now is happening by Zoom? I mean, it's not as if it previously was every meeting was in person. There were lots of calls before COVID. Still, it feels like there is a shift that less and less and less is happening in person, which I think, can be a detriment to younger lawyers who are looking to build relationships with outside counsel, that with their clients, in a way that they can actually get to know them over time and build relationships that go beyond just the kind of transactional Zoom call. I mean, people feel like, I think, they can get the job done over Zoom calls and over emails. But what's lost is kind of everything else. Like, what's lost is there's no time to build that relationship. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on how you'd advise people on that, and if you've seen any, particularly successful models.
Yeah, I think, listen, relationship building is a multi-level process. If I were to start with the sort of the foundational floor, keeping tabs on what's happening at the company is going to be probably the most important. So whether it's a Google alert or some type of thing that just keeps you up to date as to, what's happening at the company. So when you get on the phone with the lawyer, whoever it may be, whatever practice it may be, at least you have a backdrop for what may be at first front and center on their mind that day, because, something, some issue blew up over here, or we just had a big business success there. And you will be more relevant by knowing what's happening in the business that way. And it's not hard. Google Alerts does it, right away. Obviously, showcasing your expertise, and whether that's through CLE type related activity, or just, hey, I know we're not working on this issue, but I saw something come across my desk that I thought might be relevant to you. You just forward it on that kind of way, right? And then I think probably the third level is, yes, the ability to get together face to face will always be important. So you have to look for opportunities for that. If there's a conference in Chicago and you're in Chicago, and one of the lawyers from CVS is going to be going to the conference, well, reach out and just say, hey, can we have coffee, or do you want to have breakfast, or something like that. It's those little things, and it builds over time. And then getting out on the speaking circuit if you can, because there are a lot of legal conferences and healthcare related conferences where lawyers are invited to speak, and the more that you can do that, the more you get kind of seen and seen as an expert in an area, and one thing leads to another, and you may get a retention out of it.
That's great. How has your approach to kind of selecting and managing your outside counsel changed over time? Has it changed over time? Is it based on, relationships that you've long had and developed and just continue to rely on? Or, obviously there's been a shift to companies, as everybody has seen, toward, bringing in legal operations folks and running, panels and larger beauty contests versus, some companies and the older model, but I mean that many companies still do, where they have their relationships and they go back to those people. I'm curious what your approach has been, if it's evolved, and kind of the qualities you've looked for in outside counsel that you want to see when it comes to handling matters.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost for me, it is, I make the selection on who the lawyer is as opposed to who the law firm is. And so who the lawyer is paramount for me. Secondary is, okay, what firm are they with? Because I want to know if it's a particularly big matter or potentially problematic matter. I want to know that they're going to have the resources behind them if they need it at the firm. There's some where they won't, and where the single expert, at the firm can do it themselves, and that's not the issue. There won't be an issue there. The other thing I've done is, you need to think of CVS as essentially 3 separate Fortune 50 businesses under one roof. And so the lawyers, I essentially have general counsels for each of those business units. And they have a lot of responsibility and a lot of independence in picking firms for what they need, because they know what their business needs and they know what they need to meet the business needs. So I will be engaged and involved in it, but I leave a lot of it to their decision, because they're going to be held accountable for the type of work that's done and the results that are done. But I know, to a person, they look first at the quality of the lawyer and the capability of the lawyer, and then what firm they're with secondarily.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know. And shifting gears slightly, I'm curious to get your take on how, over time, technology and data in the legal department has really shifted the way that you're not just your team's work, but how you kind of think about legal services. And if you have any thoughts on, with the advent, obviously, of chat GPT and the artificial intelligence and all these thoughts of, who knows, right? Who knows what's coming in the next 10 years in terms of, maybe AI is going to take all of our jobs and be able to write all the briefs and do everything. But how has technology and data shifted the way that you've utilized legal services, and any thoughts on how that may continue to shift over time?
Yeah, there are probably two or three things I highlight, in that area. One is obviously the data analytics. Where are we spending money? Why are we spending money? And then are there learnings in that to say we can be more efficient, and whether that's in streamlining work with, one firm instead of 3 or 4 firms, or is it bringing expertise in and, bringing that skill set in to build a better practice group in-house. So that's one element of the data. The other is in the core operations of the legal team. So when you look at a company the size of CVS, I can't tell you the number of contracts, transactional related things that we have to manage. So that ability of document management, search features, other things, and just that broader contract management database is hugely important. And it's a continuing exercise of trying to get better at it, because the better you are at it, the more efficiencies you're driving. And I still, in certain areas, are very surprised that where, we know we have a certain element of our business that has probably 60 elements that will likely be in a contract. Why can't we, from an AI perspective, have the first draft spit out based off of what we know that the current client is looking for? And that's been a bugaboo of mine, that because that will drive huge efficiencies, where that first draft doesn't need to be done over 4 or 5 hours by a lawyer. It can be done with AI and then reviewed in probably an hour to make sure that it matches, and then the negotiation goes from there. And then the other way is, frankly, what we're doing here, how it drives efficiency and engagement and interaction, and your ability to control costs, travel costs, other things, by leveraging this type of technology and others. Those are probably the 3 key areas I'd highlight.
And what would you say then to folks, at outside counsel in our audience, who are thinking, okay, well, then how can I make sure that our clients are actually seeing the value, right? They're going to be looking at their metrics through, AI tools and other ways. How can outside counsel best ensure that their clients are understanding the value that's being generated? Because it's an interesting question, I think, in some ways, because there are some fields where you generally look at it, what that company is doing for their client as a value add, right? Whether it's an investment banker helping get a deal done. I think outside counsel generally has been viewed as, okay, that's like a money draw from the company. How can, are your thoughts on how outside counsel, and especially kind of our audience, think about how to show really what the value is that's being added in a way that's meaningful, that may or may not show up in the metrics that AI and things like that are showing?
Yeah, it'll be probably transaction specific, transaction by transaction, but you'll know in any negotiation that by achieving X over Y, that was worth either a defined dollar amount or some other benefit, and just highlighting that as part of not just to the legal team that you're dealing with in-house, but then making sure the legal team is explaining the benefits of that negotiation to the business people who own it going forward. And then you will also, be engaging not just with lawyers on transactions. You'll be engaging with the business folks directly. So don't bypass the in-house lawyer. That's a huge mistake. But try to build a relationship with the business folks as you're engaging with them, because then you'll be viewed as part of the broader team across the board, not just within the legal department, but within the specific business unit. And then the other thing is always try to be relevant. So if you see something that could be relevant to the lawyer that is your primary contact and the practice group that they head, be a resource for that person, because many times they have their head down trying to get through their day with all that's on their desk, and they may miss the article that highlights something that's really important, or you may all be working on something at the firm that can add value to how they should should be thinking about something. So I know there are firms who they've talked to me about it. They look at their own data and they look at their own client base and practice bases, and they'll see that they're doing a certain kind of work for client A, but they're not doing it for clients B, C, and D. And they have that internal discussion, say, well, wait a second, how come we haven't been able to bring that practice area to these clients? Because they have the same needs. So you almost need to look at your own data too, in terms of who are you representing and what areas you're representing, and then what's the cross relationship of the ability to cross-sell additional practice sets.
That's really helpful. And I'm curious, in that regard, I mean, somewhat relatedly, are there some common pitfalls or things that you've seen outside counsel do, when encountering you and others at CVS in the legal department, when trying to do things like cross-sell, or when trying to do things like win a new matter? I mean, some things you've seen that you probably see them over and over again and think, man, these guys don't get it. Curious what some of those things are.
Yeah, I think a few lessons. Don't lose sight that in-house lawyer, more and more each and every day, is the person who's going to be held accountable for what happens. And so bypassing that lawyer or trying to jump a level above or 2 levels above to get past that lawyer, that's probably not a smart thing. I know it's not a smart thing in CVS, and I think talking with some of my other colleagues at the companies, and the different legal groups that I belong to, increasingly they're looking at whoever they've assigned owns that matter. The other thing that I've seen, and this may be a little bit more the old school, but it still happens, where they try to leverage a board relationship to get their foot in the door. There's nothing that will kind of push things back with that specific general counsel than a board member, calling saying, "Hey, I'd like you to look at Janie or Johnny," kind of thing.
Right.
That's probably not a good thing to do at all. And then the last is trying to leverage the business side over the legal team to get your foot in the door and have the business drive you being brought in. Because if it happens that way, it's not going to work long term. It just won't, because the in-house lawyer needs to feel that they can trust and own how things are working. And if it's being directed from outside, it's probably not going to work long term.
Those are great pieces of advice, and definitely common pitfalls that you see. Have you looked at, how do you think about, as a legal organization, the way that, there have been much talk over the past 10, 20 years of the death of the billable hour. And yet here we are, it ain't dead. People can't seem to get away from it. It's not that there aren't people looking at concepts and doing creative things with AFAs and success fees and things like that, but it doesn't seem to have totally gone away by any means. I'm curious how you've looked at that and how you see that evolving over time.
Yeah, we've done a lot of experimentation, and I'd say much of it not successful, unfortunately. The one thing I have resisted across my career is, the accounting teams and the finance teams wanting the in-house lawyers to keep track of their time and essentially do a billable hours approach. And I've resisted that completely because what you want, particularly when the lawyers are in-house, you want them sitting in the business meetings because you want them hearing what's going on. Now, that's not something we're going to pay for an outside lawyer, but I think it's part of the carrying cost of building a very robust, effective in-house legal team. And, you know, it's hard unless you have similar continuing types of either litigation or transactional type matters. I think it's very hard to do the one size fits all pricing. I just do. And invariably somebody is losing in that model. And I would still be open to it. And I know a lot of other general counsels are. It just, for some reason, it doesn't seem to work across 90% of what we need when we're hiring an outside firm.
Any thoughts? I mean, in terms of long-term relationships, I'm sure that over the years you've built strong long-term relationships with certain outside counsel. And our group's a bit litigation focused of this audience. I'm sure you've had strong relationships in that space. Are there some important factors that for building and maintaining strong partnerships between in-house legal teams and litigation focused attorneys that you think really stand out? I mean, I imagine winning is one of them, but beyond that,
winning is clearly, or not losing as badly as you should have based off of the facts. Those are always good. I think one that's really important, Steve, is don't become complacent, and don't become sort of expectant that the work will continue to flow. You have to remain continuously hungry and make sure you're building out your relationships as best as you can across, particularly in the litigation area, across the entire litigation group. And again, you'll also build relationships with clients because not a lot of times, most of the times, the folks being deposed are the business folks who are involved in the deal.
Right.
And so being sensitive to their time pressures because of the work that they have to do, how they're being pulled away from their their day job to help defend or bring the litigation, all those things are going to be really, really important. And just being, I think, facile and understanding the interpersonal relationship of who that specific witness may be, what level in the company might they be at, and then what was their specific role in why it didn't work or did work. I mean, I needed to demonstrate it work, because a lot of times litigations are finding fault, and that fault can have repercussions not just within the legal result but also in somebody's business career.
Yep. And how do you, I mean, if you have any kind of ethos on the idea of what you would allow or want to see from more junior outside lawyers? I mean, one of the issues that folks like me can sometimes have with going to a client is, is the client okay with me having a fantastic mid-level associate take a witness at trial? Are they happy with at a meeting making sure that I'm having a senior associate present part of what we're doing so that they get that experience? Because in some ways it's like, okay, I could do the whole thing or someone else could do it, but we as outside lawyers want to make sure we're really developing people. But by that same token, clients often feel like, okay, but I don't know that I need to subsidize that, or I kind of want to make sure I'm getting the best of the best. How have you balanced that? Do you guys have a theory on that or thoughts about that in-house?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that those lawyers get that experience and develop that skill set. And so on some levels, we're willing to make some level of investment to make that happen. But what I would say is you shouldn't be bringing them in for the first time to do that. They should already be known to the team, right? By having worked on either that matter specifically or on prior matters. And there's already some underlying relationship and awareness of who Janie or Johnny is and how good they are and, that kind of thing. And I also then would, depending on who else is going to be in that meeting, if there's going to be more senior legal people there or more senior business people there, I would definitely have the conversation ahead of time with whoever the responsible in-house lawyer is to say, hey, okay, how do you want to handle this meeting? Okay, I know you're going to have the vice president at this, where we've only been dealing with senior directors or, that kind of thing, because it will be just as important to the in-house lawyer how that meeting goes as it will
Right.
be to you, right?
No, absolutely. And it's interesting because it's been one of the biggest challenges, I think, in the legal profession, especially on the litigation side, as more and more cases, not just settle, but actually courts have less and less arguments on
Yeah,
things, right? This is over the past 10 to 15 years, the amount of arguments just on motion to dismiss, right, or discovery motions has just plummeted, with judges just ruling, which is fine. They're saying I can rule on the papers, but what that's
right.
led to is, less and less opportunities for lawyers to get up in court and get that experience. And so I know that me and others are really focused on, like, we need to give folks every chance they can, whether it's through pro bono or all the trials we have, to get opportunities. And I find they're generally very open to it, as long as, to your point, they already know that person is they're a known commodity who they think very highly of.
Right, right.
And so it's like very calculated, low risk endeavor.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I'm curious. I mean, are you seeing similar sort of approaches in arbitrations? I would think you'd get more hands-on experience in
Yeah.
arbitrations, right?
Arbitrations give many more opportunities for
Yeah,
hands-on experience because it's a slightly more informal environment. The stakes might be just as high, but you're in a situation where, generally clients are more open to it. And sometimes you've got 3-week arbitrations that go on, and people are fine with, look, I've had these 4 associates who have been involved with the case deeply. They've been spending, every day with this expert witness, and they know this issue front and back. It would make perfect sense to let them take that examination, rather than saying, okay, actually the senior partner on it is going to get up to speed on that issue and do it themselves.
yeah. No, I mean, listen, it's our youngest. He's in his first year of law school. And we talk an awful lot about this. Sort of what's the best career track. Do you go to the big firm and you sort of just plow forward at the big firm, or do you go to the big firm for 2 or 3 years and then say, go to the SEC or go to the FTC, or for a few years and work your way up in the management of those organizations, of those agencies, and then after being out 6 or 7 years, try to pop back into the firm because you have a ready base of expertise that's been built up specific to an area of practice that you're interested in. So it's a
Yeah.
big fork in the road, and I think it's a growing question for young lawyers as to how is the best way to navigate, to your point, that first 10 years of your career.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. And what I'd say is, it's funny when you come out of law school, and I'm sure your son is feeling this way as you go into the process of interviews. I think people go around and they interview with the big New York firms, whatever the big firms are, and everything kind of looks the same. And at that point, you're like, okay, I maybe you get offers from a number of those firms, and then they all just, like, I can't tell the difference, so I'll pick the one where the people seem the nicest, or I got whatever it is. And actually, what I try to tell people is, not there might be 6 firms that are all equally as phenomenal A+ firms, but your experience, if you want to be a litigator, is going to be very different at 2 of those firms versus the other 4. And so, that the kind of, before you accept any offers, it's a great opportunity to actually push, and ask those questions, and then to make sure when you go in there, no one's going to own your career more than you will, and you got to find out who are the people that are going to trial. Go ask to work with them, make a good first impression, and then I think hope then be in a place where you can get a lot of trial experience.
That's exactly right, and because there is no substitute for experience. And I mean, it's the way I drove my career. I was not getting relevant experience at the big New York firm. I was sitting in a warehouse in Syracuse, New York, doing document work for a full year. When I had been planning on maybe not doing depositions, but at least being at the depositions and seeing how the process worked and learning that. And it's why I left to go to a smaller firm to get that experience. And because there's no substitute for getting the experience.
Yeah, and what I do think firms have seen with younger lawyers, I mean, I've certainly focused on this, and others that I work with have, I mean, is actually the firm is robbing itself of great opportunities by failing to give those people that experience, by saying, Janie and Johnny aren't allowed to take a deposition until they're in their fifth year, and they're not allowed
Exactly.
to examine witness at trial till their seventh year. It's like, you're not developing these people into who they can be. So then they don't have the ability to then get up and do it. And then they don't have the ability to go talk to relationships and clients that they might be able to develop about things they're doing, because they're not doing anything.
Right.
I do think that firms do need to focus on that for younger lawyers more and more, and hopefully more will. And I hope your son's a beneficiary of that. Speaking of that issue, not everybody who is at a big law firm is going to stay there. Some are going to, want to go into government because they're going to want to be trial lawyers and then maybe come back, maybe not. But others want to go in-house and work at fantastic companies like CVS and get that experience. Can you talk a bit about what the things are that you look for and that you have, obviously, the more, people who work for you looking for when hiring people, both at a junior level and then even moving up to kind of a more mid-senior level?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first entry point generally is after, say, your fifth year, right? And you're either going to be hearing about an opportunity, or a headhunter will call, or you'll just see on some posting that opportunity. Invariably, I would say 50% of the hiring we do comes from the firms that are doing work with us, and associates there. It's sort of natural. You've built a relationship. The lawyers in the practice group know you, understand you, and they say, hey, we've got an opening here. Why don't you think about doing it? As you work your way up to be into more senior roles, then it very much is, it's driven by that word of mouth, but then also obviously by the big headhunting firms, because if you have an assistant general counsel position opening, for example, more than likely we're not going to be taking somebody from a firm in for the first time to fill that role, right? We're going to be looking for somebody who has had in-house experience, and it won't be their first time in-house in such a senior role. So if you really want to pursue an in-house career, I think you have to start looking at not necessarily just entry-level positions, but you're not going to get to the say top 2 or 3 positions in the in-house law practice generally from coming outside. It generally won't work that way.
And how do you see that once someone gets the opportunity to come to a company like CVS and they're working in-house, what are the kind of qualities that you really look for that you've seen over time end up making the most successful in-house lawyers who end up rising through the ranks? Are there things that you've seen, patterns you've seen?
Yeah, I think probably first and foremost would be really good interpersonal skills. Because you'll be spending a lot of time with the client directly, okay? Whether it's on Zoom or whether it's actually in the offices, or frankly, in the deal rooms as the deals are being negotiated. So that ability to just be able to engage in a social kind of way. And then as you're doing that, clearly then showing your level of expertise and your capabilities, that's going to come across a big way. The other thing is, you have to really like the business that you're representing, right? And you have to believe in it, because it's what you're doing each and every day. And if you don't like aerospace and you're at an aerospace company as an in-house lawyer, it's probably not going to work. So you need to make sure it's in a business area, that interests you overall, because then that can help drive your career track. And then I think the last point I would use is, don't be afraid to take risks. And that is hard for a lot of younger lawyers. But I was now lucky enough to have been thrown into different situations where I didn't fully have the skill set required. And I could have very easily said no and stayed, conservative and risk avoidant. But I didn't. And I dove in and was able to, figure it out and make a difference. And you're expanding your skill sets and your practice sets, but then you're also demonstrating to management, this is a fairly facile individual who can do a lot of different things and can be kind of a multi-level player for us here, not just a trademark lawyer or just the M&A lawyer, right?
Yeah. And how actually, I mean, to that end, how do you see people balancing this kind of desire that I'm sure some lawyers have of just making sure everyone's aware of every risk that we're taking? And so, every day there's all these things happening. Hold on a second, we could get sued, this could happen, versus, being a partner to your business teams. How do you think the most successful people are able to navigate those issues? And really, I think of that as an issue that straddles both in-house teams and working with external lawyers, right? You don't want your external lawyers also, creating 5-alarm fires
Right.
for every little issue that comes up.
Yeah. So I probably have two pieces of advice there. One goes back to your first year of law school and legal writing. And remember how we were trained under IRAC in legal writing: issue, rule, application, and conclusion. And I've said this many times from the stage to all of my lawyers, all 250 plus of them. You need to change that to ICRA, meaning here's the issue, here's the conclusion. And because generally the business people do not care about the multi-levels of analysis that you went through to get to the conclusion. They may probe and say, well, wait, that doesn't make sense. Why is that way? Then you get into, well, here's what the law is, or here's what the rule is, right? And do it that way. But if you try to take the 15 minutes to walk them through how you got to the conclusion, you will have lost them. And because generally all they want is the answer. I think that's really important. And then the other is, and it comes with experience, is knowing what are real issues and what aren't real issues. And when I went to the small New Jersey firm, I'll never forget this. One of my main mentors throughout my career, he said, there are 1,000 things at trial that you could worry about. Your job is to figure out the 10 that you need to worry about. And that's true regardless of what practice you're in. Whether you're working on an M&A transaction, whether you're doing a straight commercial deal, joint venture, or whether it's a piece of litigation. There are 1,000 things that you could be worrying about. You need to develop the experience and the comfort to say, I get it. It's all over here. This is where I need to be focusing. And the better you develop that skill set, the more successful you'll be, not just in-house, but also as an outside lawyer too.
That's great advice. And I think that's actually a perfect place to end it, because that's such a strong point that I think hopefully will really reverberate with our audience and help them quite a bit. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us here on the Insight Roundtable today, Tom. It's been fantastic. Really appreciate it. I hope you have some great plans for yourself in the coming months to do something fun.
I'm looking forward to it, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Okay, all the best.